Hi, everybody. My name is Charlie McCready. I'm a parental alienation coach, and I'm delighted to be joined today by Lisa Johnson, who is from Been There, Got Out. So, hi, Lisa.
Hi, Charlie. So good to see you again.
It's so good to have you on this podcast because you guys are so inextricably linked with all the stuff that we do in the parental alienation space. But just to kick us off, can you tell us a little bit more about what you do and kind of what you specialize in?
Okay. So I always say I'm Lisa, I'm the female half of Been There Got Out. My partner Chris is the male half. And together we help people dealing with high conflict separations, divorces, custody battles are our specialty, and co-parenting hell so that they have the chance of the best outcome in family court and beyond, because ours are the clients whose cases are, my lawyer said this is the craziest case I've ever had. And so they are always back in court. And so everything we do focuses on something called legal abuse. And that's where an ex is using the legal system to wear you down and bleed you dry. And of course, kids are in the middle of that. And yeah, so that's our thing.
Amazing. So, are you actually providing the legal advice, or do you point people towards lawyers, or what is the sort of support that parents can come to you for?
Okay, so we're not lawyers, so we do not give legal advice. We
Hmm.
give strategic advice. And that's something to note because we have a lot of lawyers as clients, is that lawyers are not trained in strategy. So Chris
Yeah.
and I kind of fill the gap between what lawyers are not trained to do and therapists don't understand. Lawyers are trained in logic. They think that when you're separating or when you're dealing with two parties, that everyone's coming to the table thinking, I'm going to do what's fair and I'm going to do what's best for the kids. But when you're dealing with someone like our clients' exes, that person's all about themselves and they're not thinking about either of those priorities. And so those cases have to be approached very differently. And then therapists who are not skilled in domestic violence, especially post-separation abuse and how children are weaponized, don't understand because they're supposed to be focused on your healing. They don't understand the trauma of having to be stuck in the system with somebody and who is using children to punish you for the end of the relationship.
Yeah, and this is such a blind spot for exactly as you say, the therapists, the lawyers, and I think a big part of it comes down to the fact that the psychologists still don't recognize parental alienation as being a real thing. And as a result of it, all of those people are not being trained up to deal with this.
I think it's not even just alienation or, it's such a controversial term.
Mm.
It's domestic violence. It's
Ah,
that domestic violence takes different forms, and our world still thinks that it's mostly physical. And so emotional abuse, which is what alienation is a form of psychological, it's invisible abuse.
mm.
So people don't take it as seriously or they don't understand it.
So tell me a little bit more about how that post-separation abuse fits with alienation.
Okay. So one of the things that we say our clients' exes do when they separate is threaten them by saying, if you leave me or if this divorce proceeds, I'm going to leave you homeless, penniless, and childless. So you're not going to have a place to live. I'm going to throw you out. I'm going to burn through all the money. I'm going to exact revenge on you through the court system. But the worst and the most painful is I'm going to take the kids away from you, not
Mm.
just physically, but I'm going to turn them against you so that they never want to talk to you again. They don't want to have a relationship with you again. And this starts before separation. So we talk about grooming that happens
Hmm.
where kids, while you're still in the relationship, just because you're dealing with a disordered other person, loyalty is a big issue. And
Mm.
so we know, Charlie, you know a lot about that. We
I
know
do.
how they want everyone on their side, like they're the winner and everyone else is a loser. So when a relationship with someone like that, an adult, ends, we always say that it's different than a normal breakup because someone with a disorder has their greatest fear is abandonment. And
Mhm.
so when that relationship ends, they feel abandoned, and that is so uncomfortable that they can't deal with that or the sense of failure at being a spouse. And so it turns into this rage where everything splits and it's like, I'm the victim and the other person is the villain. And so then appearances matter. So I have to prove to the world that you did, who's really like the victim, you're horrible, you did everything wrong, and I didn't do anything wrong. And so to really show the world, I'm going to make sure our kids stay with me, that they align with me and they reject you because I can't because you're the one, you're awful. You've ruined my life. You've ruined our lives. And so everything gets into the kids' heads that it's your fault.
Mm. I mean, that grooming that you were just talking about, that's something that parents who've even been through alienation for a couple of years are often unaware of. I call it pre-alienation because it's
Right.
basically that, and I know from experience that I went through 10 years of that. And I
Yeah.
wasn't even aware of it. A lot of it is so subtle, just happening in the background, undermining your character. And that's the thing that makes it really easy for the abusers to then flip the kids, in this
Yeah.
very short period of time where they're kind of okay one moment, and then the next day they've cut off and they're not seeing you anymore. But how do you see the abusers kind of continuing the abuse into the way that they abuse the legal system?
So, one of the biggest things that they do is they threaten to take custody away. And at the same time, they are telling the kids, don't you want to live with me more? Like, don't
Hmm.
you want to spend more time with me? And so they put the kids in the middle, which is horrible because kids shouldn't be making certain choices. But
Right.
legally, the number one thing that happens that shows that they're on the path towards trying to turn the
Mhm.
kids against you is they start violating the parenting plan.
Yeah.
So when you separate, you come up with a schedule. It tries to be as fair as possible, not that it's equal all the time because of different schedules, but you usually work something out. And then someone starts making excuses as to why you can't have your parenting time. Specifically, the kids don't want to see you, they're upset, and then it's the message starts going to the kids that it's your fault, like you left us. It's
Yeah.
not that the marriage or the relationship split up. It's like that person left us. And then the kids start feeling like, oh, that abandonment.
Yeah.
Why? And then they start asking questions. And then, there's a lot of back chatting, about this. And so kids start doubting reality.
Mm. Mm.
And then, I mean, and there's so many ways that they do
But
it where they'll
This, this,
over,
this is the whole cognitive dissonance thing, being
yeah,
being told two stories you can't cope with two at once, and you have to go for one or the other. And they
yeah.
generally go with the person who's lying most because they've been spending the most time brainwashing them.
Right. And kids often take the path of least resistance
Mm.
or they'll align with who they see as the stronger parent. So, in the dynamics of a relationship, often an abuser comes across as very powerful
Mhm.
and kids are like, I don't want to be treated like my target parent is. So I'm safer here. Or kids learn something called fawning, where it's basically a survival skill. Like, what do I have to do to stay safe? Like, I'll just figure it out
Yeah.
you know I interviewed an Irish play therapist named Adele Lawler, and she was saying that a lot of times uh, when a parents separate, there's like this pulling that goes on, like where the kids are between both of them, and there's a pull, and at one point, kids have to let go of one parent's hand.
Mm. So splitting.
Right. It can't, in a normal divorce, when both parents are trying to support the children's relationship with the other parent,
Yeah.
they don't have to do that as much. But when one parent is pulling
Mm.
more strongly, it's just like, the kid just lets go. And a lot of times when they're older, they can say, uh, they can explain maybe why they did it. I'm thinking about another interview I did with an attorney who said that one of her male friends had gotten divorced and his kids kept aligning with their mother. And he and his ex-wife would fight. And then as the kids got older, they were talking about it one day and they said, we just didn't want to see you fight. We knew that you could deal with it. It was just easiest for us to
Yeah.
side with her because we didn't want you to keep fighting.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's so hard for the kids because, as you say, they go for the path of least resistance, which means going with the person who is threatening to do them the most damage rather than the target parent who's kind of that nice parent. But I just wanted to dial back a couple of steps because one of the things that a lot of parents would want to know about, because you were talking about breach of court orders and access to kids, Do you have any kind of hints and tips for people around how to enforce those court orders? Because
Yeah.
it's a quagmire for everybody.
Yeah, I mean, enforcement in general is really, really hard. There's things that so Chris and I teach something we call strategic communication, and we're
Mhm.
actually releasing a course on it. It's called How to Communicate with Your Ex Without Destroying Your Case or Losing Your Mind. And
Okay. And
so
just very quickly, where can people find that?
well, so we're going to be putting a link out, but we have this whole program called From Fear to Fierce in Family Court. But if you just go to our website at beenthere.com, like we'll be putting up the link hopefully by the time this is released.
Great. And I'll put the link up for your website at the end of this podcast so everybody can find that so they'll be able to find the course. So anyway, I
Yeah,
distracted you from enforcement.
that's okay.
But yeah.
Yeah, so strategic communication is the basis of everything.
Mhm.
And it's a way for you to really put together your strong exhibits for court, strong evidence that you're going to need. It's where you are writing to you're documenting everything. So you're writing to your ex, but you're writing for the invisible audience always. A
Right.
judge, a mediator, a custody evaluator, attorney for the child, guardian ad litem, whoever. So you are presenting as the best co-parent ever, but at the same time, you're documenting your ex's patterns of behavior over time, the impact it has on your children, and also on your relationship with your children. And so this is a way, this is it's part of what it does is it turns hearsay into evidence because if you just go in and say what someone's doing, or even
Mhm.
that you've journaled it yourself, that's just one person's side of the story.
Yeah.
But when you're kind of and this is like a very complex way to
Yeah.
do it that has to be learned, but when you're writing a certain way, you kind of are able to gather information where it's a dialogue with your ex, which is one of the best exhibits for court. It's not
Okay.
just you saying something. Here they have a chance to respond. So you're basically cornering them in a
Hmm.
very strategic way, which
Hmm.
doesn't
Hmm.
feel uncomfortable. And then that builds your documentation for the case. But the other thing it does is it protects you from false claims of parental alienation. So
Yeah.
one of the things that happens to our clients is we know their exes project. And
Hmm.
so they'll be the ones doing this, and then they'll say that you're doing it. And it's
Mm.
just crazy. And so by doing this, by doing strategic communication, by the way, we also like teach all of our clients the different alienation factors because we want them to fully understand what it means.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times people unconsciously do things that they don't realize are hurting their kids and can be used against them in court. So
Absolutely.
strategic
This is the whole.
communication is like documenting to
Mhm.
protect yourself, to make sure you're not doing it, but also to build an aggressive case against your ex as if it starts to get worse, and often it does start to get worse.
Yeah, because I mean, these are impossible people to deal with, and you've kind of covered all the, most of them have been through trauma and are now in this place of self-protection through various mental disorders, basically. Um, do you find that when you're kind of adopting this strategy, do you find that any of this gets fed back into the kids? Because alienators have this habit of sharing, court material, financial material, stuff
Oh,
about
oh,
us.
all the time. I mean,
Do
so
you
the
have to
strategic
write it in a
communication.
way that the kids can see it and it's not going to upset them as well?
Yeah, because imagine the invisible audience is
Mm.
anybody. So
Yeah.
you have to be very, very careful about the way you say it. So one of the things that's sort of the spine of it is
Hmm.
something we call the universal agreement, which is basically what is something that you and your ex can both agree on that you can put in writing that nobody would debate. And everybody thinks I have like me and my ex, like my ex is awful. They've got a personality disorder. Like we don't agree on anything. But there's things that you can say that sort of
Hmm.
anchor both of you to a
Hmm.
certain value that they cannot dispute publicly. So, for example, in especially an alienation case where your ex is trying to stir up drama and chaos, especially with the kids, when they do something and you want to document it back to them, you would say like, "Oh," and you kind of say that like this just happened, or I found out this just happened, and then you could say something like, "I'm sure we can both agree how important it is to shield the kids from any conflict between us."
Mm.
So
Mm.
that we
Nice one.
call a universal agreement. So now you're writing, that is one of the values of the court.
Yeah.
If your kids saw that, that's not inflammatory. And your ex can't say anything about it because they can't say, no, our kids should hear about all of our fighting.
Mm,
because
mm.
that's harmful to children. Like even if they feel that way, you've basically cornered them. They cannot dispute that. If they do, I mean, it's awful for them.
So do these people who are kind of alienating kids, how do they typically respond to this sort of communication?
Oh, I love this question. We say there's three ways that they respond. So as you start, and these communications are very, very short.
Hmm.
They're usually maximum 4 sentences, which is very hard for our clients because they're like, "But I want to." I'm like, "Say it to
No,
us. Say it to us. We'll get it out, and we will tweak it and edit it for you, and you will start to learn." Because strategic
really good.
communication also turns the power dynamic around. But the
Yeah.
three ways that your ex will respond. Well, first of all, I'll give you just a tiny example. One of our clients' exes got so frustrated that she started saying, "Can you please use more words?" Another one said, "Why are you being so friendly?"
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
because they don't like that.
Yeah.
But the number one way that they react to a strategic communication is they explode. They just rage at you
Mm,
about, like you will document something, you'll write something to them, and they'll just be like, "You're a horrible parent," blah, 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 blah. That strengthens your case
mm. Good.
because they're showing who they are. And actually, I interviewed an attorney recently from New York City who said their anger is your gold. So
Mm,
even though you might be feeling like, I don't want to deal with their rage, if you can kind of shift your perspective, and that's something we help people with, if you realize like this is helpful to my case, we call it usefully awful.
yeah.
Let them rage at you and think of it as this is evidence for my case, like this is
Mhm,
helpful.
mhm.
So and you start getting used to it and thinking this is a good thing. Like it's like a game, where you
Yeah.
think, what
Yeah.
can I do to sort of poke the bear, knowing I'm gathering information for my case.
So
So when they rage at you, it's helpful because you will have written something focused on your kids, which matches the value of the court. For example, let's shield the kids from the conflict. By them raging at you as a parent,
yeah.
they're going against the values of the court and they're doing what's not helpful for your kids. So they're continuing their bad behavior.
Yeah. It's because I guess one of the things that happens is you just use the term poke the bear. I use that all the time. So I
Oh, really?
tell people to try not to poke the bear or be
Oh, we want
careful
to
about the
poke the bear
consequences.
with this.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. What are the consequences, or what do you see as some of the consequences for the kids? Because when you poke the bear normally turns around and attacks the kids as well as
It
attack.
depends. All right, so that's good too. But I forgot to say the other two things of the way they
Hmm?
react. So hold that thought.
Okay, yeah, yeah. Well,
So the rage will help your case. The other thing is the silent treatment. You acknowledge something that happened, and they are just quiet, and they because that happens a lot. They don't say anything. That's helpful for your case because you're focusing on something with your kids and they're not participating in the conversation. It's
mm-hmm.
the parenting issue. Like why don't they want to say anything? And again, we're focusing on their patterns of behavior. So it's not just like one time they don't answer or one time you have to have a well documented pattern over time.
Yeah.
And the third thing is the most miraculous, and that's when they actually comply and they behave better. So it's very rare, but it can happen,
I was going to
especially
say,
for
how
people who
often does that happen?
it does happen sometimes
Yeah,
because it depends on the type of person you're dealing with. Some of
yeah.
these people are smart. They're like, "Ooh, this will look really bad for me in
Hmm.
front of a judge, so I better behave myself."
Okay.
We've seen strategic communication really change decisions. It's
Good.
used to keep people out of court because it does change the power dynamic around and it does corner people
Yeah.
like your ex. A lot of times it doesn't actually fix the problem, but if nothing else, it documents it when you have to go back to court to enforce something.
Yeah.
Because the court always wants to see that you've done everything you can
Hmm.
before wasting their valuable time and resources. They always are like, figure it out yourself, figure it out yourself.
Hmm.
All right. So now the second thing with the
Yep.
kids, or interrupt me anytime,
No,
Charlie,
no,
because
no, no,
both
no.
you and I are very
I've
chatty.
just got so many questions for you. But go on,
Okay.
go on with your second thing.
All
Well,
right.
actually,
So
no. I'll
how
tell you
does
what.
it go ahead?
I'm going to interrupt you there for 1 second, just before we get on to the second thing, because uh, as you say, the courts want you to do as much as possible before going back to court. Is mediation then kind of an interim step that follows on from that kind of first thing that you do with this strategy? Do you encourage people to go to mediation before going to court? Because that normally doesn't work. But how,
Absolutely. I know
how
this
does
sounds
mediation
crazy.
come into this?
All right. So as a like I'm state certified domestic violence advocate and
Hmm.
certain like a lot of mediators refuse to touch domestic violence in mediation because they're like, it could be danger. I'm not talking about where someone has a restraining order or where they really cannot be, you don't even have to be in the same room because there's different types of mediation. But
Yeah.
I've also interviewed mediators who say it's not fair for domestic violence victims to only be faced with the choice of litigation, which is going to be super expensive. It
Hmm.
makes things far worse. You're giving away your power when you
Yeah.
have to go to court, and you're spending tons of money to have strangers make decisions for you.
Hmm.
So we always encourage, well, first we encourage strategic negotiation before mediation because often it's a waste of time and money. So you want to do what you can
Yeah.
on your own through this strategic communication. And
Hmm.
then if you have to, you go to mediation and then possibly arbitration, which still saves a lot more money, and there is someone making a decision. But really, for our clients, one of the things we teach them is something called taking strategic oversight of your case and
Hmm.
realizing your ex better than anyone else. You were in that relationship probably for some amount of time. You know how to poke the bear, and you also know how to protect yourself on some level.
Yeah.
So using psychology,
Hmm.
and it's not a blanket thing because we all have different types of exes, even though they're very predictable. So
Very,
it
very
depends on
predictable.
figuring out leverage that you can use in mediation. And so
Mm.
mediation to us is it's a dress rehearsal for court. And a lot of our clients are pro se, meaning they represent themselves.
Yeah.
So in mediation, we really encourage them to prepare as if they were going to trial and
Mhm.
present their case, have their evidence. It doesn't have to be as formal as court, but sort of to understand the values that the court cares about. Specifically, they want to see each parent supporting the child's relationship with the other parent, except in documented cases of abuse or neglect. That's not what we're
Hmm.
talking about
Hmm.
here. Or they want to make sure that one parent is not undermining the parent's relationship with the child.
Yeah.
So that is something that we really focus on in terms of alienation or whatever you want to call it, abuse by proxy issues, is like what has that other person done to undermine your relationship with your child? And that's what we're really having our clients document. So if you go to mediation, you're like, well, here's this, and you can
Hmm.
basically speak the language of the court. You're cornering your ex, and any good mediator who's still neutral could say, this would look really bad in court.
So is that a good tactical play for a targeted parent? So the victim of the abuse, just to go through the mediation process in order for it to fail, so that they've got more ammunition for court.
So, okay, let me back up. I think a lot of it, before you even go into mediation, you need
Hmm.
like a tremendous amount of support and strategy because preparing for mediation is a really big deal. People go in and they don't even understand what it is, and then they try to get the mediator to listen to it. So first is like
So,
a
but
lot of
that's such a
education.
good point. I would imagine so many people take court in a completely different level of like seriousness and preparation versus the mediation, because they don't see it with the same level of like gravity or importance. But actually, what you're saying is that, yeah, treat it the same. That's
Yeah.
such a brilliant piece of advice.
Right. And like have your documentation ready. And also when you're in mediation, nobody is making a decision for you. A
Mm.
mediator can push in a couple of directions. And often it's also important to remember that in these power dynamic relationships where there's an abused person and an abuser, often people will pressure the target to
Mhm.
cave first because they see that you're more flexible. So it's
Yeah,
really important to also go into mediation with like knowing, okay, this is what I'm going to agree to, and I'm not going to go past this. Otherwise, I'm going to court, so I'll do better in court.
yeah,
So it
yeah.
really requires a lot of like training before
Hmm.
heading into mediation, even if you have an attorney, because attorneys get really fatigued by these cases and they'll be like, oh, just, like, let's just finish it, just take us. And we
Yeah.
see so many of our clients come to us when they were like, my lawyer pressured me to settle and I don't even know why I did it, or I didn't even read the agreement and now I'm screwed because this
Mm.
happened. So
Mm.
strategic oversight is like you have to step up and really understand what's going on
Yeah.
and really prepare yourself emotionally, strategically, and with proper documentation to
That
get
that
somewhere.
that can be hard for the victims from another angle as well, because if these victims are consistent with kind of what happens in the alienation space, most of them are empaths. They don't like
All of
conflict.
them are empaths.
They
That's
are terrified of conflict, and
right.
being mentally prepared to hold your ground in a conflictual situation. I mean, you kind of need coaching just for that bit alone to get
Absolutely
yourself into
do.
a good mental space.
But life is to me, this is negotiation. And this
Yeah.
is something we teach all the time too. Like your life every day, you're performing negotiations.
Hmm.
You're figuring things out. I think this is such an opportunity for people to stand up for themselves
Yeah.
instead of just saying, I can't do it. I don't want to even try. Like, why not try something? Like it's going to save you tons of money, even if it
Hmm.
doesn't succeed.
Yep.
Again, you're going to look great to the court because you'll be like, Your Honor, we've tried this many times.
Yep.
Here's our reasonable position. Here's our parenting plan that we've tried to work out that they have no reasonable objection to. Here's
Yep.
what we're asking for. Here's why we're entitled to it. Like,
Hmm.
that's what the court wants to see. They don't want to make the decisions for you. They don't know your family. You know your
Yep.
family. So to go through the process of really trying to hammer out details, again, even if you don't do everything, if you can even get some stuff done, you've saved tons of money and
Hmm.
time and energy. In my own situation, when my ex didn't even know I had a lawyer at the beginning of the divorce, my lawyer was really good in some ways. He said, "Let's have you go into mediation, pretend you don't have a lawyer, play
Yep.
dumb. Here's the plans that you can accept. Here's the ones that are okay. Let's talk about it. And here's the ones let's not say yes to and think about court." And so I was really, really prepared. And I
Hmm.
went into mediation. It took a few sessions. We'd meet every for 2 hours at a time. And we got nowhere with the financial stuff, but I got the most excellent parenting plan. And my lawyer
Good.
was so proud of me. He was just like, you just saved and this was years ago. He's like, you
Yeah.
saved at least $10,000 by just doing that yourself. And it really protected my children too.
Mm,
So,
mm, mm.
there's so many things people don't realize. And Chris and I are part of something called the Amicable Divorce Network, which sounds like an oxymoron because we only do high conflict. But the reason we're part of it is because the professionals in the Amicable Divorce Network are child-centered in terms of divorce, which means we want to
Good.
keep you out of court and
Good.
we want to meet other people who are very skilled in
Mm,
conflict resolution because we
mm.
know the more litigation and fighting, the more it bleeds onto your children and more they're more likely to
Completely.
feel stuck in the middle. So if
Yeah.
we can keep them out of this and truly shield them from the conflict, as much conflict as possible, that's going to be better for the family.
Absolutely. And I love the way that that's so child focused because so often the children get forgotten about. I mean, I hate to say it, but in a lot of divorces, children are almost like a side item to the finances, which is where all the focus seems to go. It's
Yeah,
shocking.
well, in our world, because our clients actually custody is the number one thing.
Yeah. Good. Good.
Yeah.
That's what it should be. So
Mhm.
what was the second thing before I start taking you down other rabbit holes?
Remind me of what the question was.
So you were taking us through the top three, the kind of the three things that you had as your strategy to how to kind of deal with these court cases. You're collecting evidence in first instance.
Okay. So, turning hearsay into evidence,
Mm,
protecting yourself from false claims of parental alienation. But the one that I think is one of the most important is through strategic communication, you start turning the power dynamic around in the relationship.
hmm.
Because remember, your clients, our clients, they've had horrible trauma. Their kids are being turned against, and they feel like a
Yep.
lot of them feel suicidal. They feel like I can't go on. I'm exhausted. The number one word we hear is overwhelmed. Like I
Mm,
can't deal with this anymore. A lot of people meet us post divorce, years post divorce, and they have all this guilt and shame of like, everyone else has said, why can't I just move on? Why can't I just let it go? The kids want this. Like, why shouldn't I
mm,
just let them have what they want and stop fighting so much? They can't because they know something is wrong.
yeah.
It's not the right thing to do, but they don't know how to fight back properly. Because we always say, if you go into family court with guns blazing, like Chris calls it, if you present as Mama Bear, you're going to get
Hmm.
bitten by the system, Mama Bear or
Yep.
Papa Bear. And that's what a lot of people do because they're so emotional. They're feeling such rage and injustice that this is happening, that they present that well. And that is not the way to behave in mediation or court,
So
because
there was a word you used subtly a couple of times before, reasonable. I
Reasonable.
kind of really picked up on that word when I was going through courts because the
Mhm.
judge kept using it, and I thought, this is like this is like a golden nugget, and
Yeah.
because he wanted everybody to be reasonable. I mean, is that a top tip for parents? Just it's exact kind of fitting in with what you're saying. Don't be angry, be reasonable.
Well, you can be angry,
Yeah.
but so when you go to court, so that's another thing we work on with people. We call it presentation. And
Hmm.
so for presentation, the best way to be is as calm as possible, which
Yeah.
sounds impossible. How can I be calm when this is happening to me? But you need for people to like you so that they believe you. That's your credibility. Chris and I are New Yorkers, even though I live right over the border in Connecticut. We live near New York City. There's lots of craziness going on. And one thing that we grew up seeing was there's people standing on soapboxes screaming about stuff. When
Mm.
someone is doing that, it doesn't even matter what they're saying because you're not really paying attention because it's the way that that's coming out. That's
Yeah.
the same way you appear in court when you're raging about stuff.
Hmm.
Everyone stops listening because they're like, this person's, they
They're
can't control
ranting. They're just
themselves.
yeah. They're no
Yeah.
longer making it, which is what alienators do.
Right, right. So let me talk a little bit about presentation and reasonable. So we often teach a lot about the art of persuasion, and there's three elements to it. So logos is logic. That's your
Mm-hmm.
facts and evidence. And that's really important, but that's only one third of the case. And you'll often hear people say, my facts and evidence were perfect, and the judge didn't listen to me. And there's bias. It's because the facts don't speak for themselves.
Yeah.
That goes to presentation, and that's called pathos. That's the emotions around with which those facts are presented. That
Yeah.
is so, so important because I know I always go on tangents, but this is connected. There's something called the 738-55% rule. People only pay attention to 7% of our words,
Yeah.
38% to our tone, and
Hmm.
55% to our body language. So if you are
Mm.
out of control, nobody's listening to you.
Yeah.
So that's why presentation is so important. And then the third part is ethos, and that's your courtroom demeanor. That's the etiquette. That's how it's understanding how to operate within the system.
Yeah.
So we always think about it as like the Wizard of Oz. The judge is the wizard, you're Dorothy. You're
Hmm.
begging, you're at the bottom of the totem pole of power. You cannot come in there and be like, this is what this means, and this is alienation, this expert, like that. They're not listening.
Mm.
So it's putting those three things together properly to make a really effective case. And it's not easy, but it's definitely a skill that can be learned. And we have so
Mm.
many clients with lawyers, but without lawyers as well that do really, really well in family court because they understand those three elements and
Yeah.
how to make them work together.
So and does this can this help? So when they're pro se, I can see the immediate value for that. If they do have lawyers, how does that help them?
Okay, so lawyers that know us generally tend to really like us because lawyers' jobs is only to be their client's ally and advocate, to take
Hmm.
the information and translate it into the law.
Yeah.
But our clients and yours dealing with these really emotional issues are very needy. Lawyers
Mm.
don't want needy clients. There's this myth that like lawyers can make so much money off it. Lawyers have like other cases, not just ours. They
Yeah.
don't want to hear it. They don't have the time for it. So
Yeah.
one of the things Chris and I do, so I'll tell you about our weekly legal abuse support group, which we actually combine our men and women together. But
Hmm.
we deal with the emotional burden that our clients are facing, and we figure like ways for them to get that emotion out elsewhere,
Yeah.
or how to organize it into a passionate argument that where they're not out of control. So
Yeah.
lawyers like us because they'll say, you are making my client, I don't have to babysit my client.
Hmm.
You have trained our clients on how to behave in court. So just because you are not pleading a case, you're still sitting there where your lawyer is. A lot of
Yeah.
times, and I've been guilty myself, our body language, you're going, rolling your eyes, shaking your head,
Mm. Mm.
going, your family, if they're there, is doing the same thing. That's very insulting to a judge and other people in the court. So knowing how to
Yeah.
control your face, knowing how to control your body when you're a witness, knowing how to answer questions properly.
Yeah.
Where, for example, you're answering only the question that's asked. You're doing it in a concise manner. Like
Mm-hmm.
all of those things, most of the time lawyers don't train clients in. And then clients are like, why didn't my lawyer coach me? Because your lawyer's not a coach most of the time.
Can I just take this opportunity as well just to remind parents that all the amazing stuff that you're talking about, Lisa, it's so important and will make such an enormous difference in the outcome. And there are lots of people out there who won't invest in themselves. They won't invest in the process of getting a good result for their kids because they kind of think, oh, I don't need to do this. And I have exactly the same thing with a lot of alienated parents who don't recognize the value that it brings them in helping to rebuild these relationships. And I would just advocate for every parent, go invest in some coaching. It will really make an enormous difference to you. Get it way
Yeah.
beyond what you can ever comprehend. And the result manifests itself in your safety and your children's safety and much better outcomes.
And not just your immediate, like your relationship with your children, but think about intergenerational trauma.
Mm, mm,
To go through this, often it continues for generations.
yeah.
I'm actually interviewing, I didn't even tell you about this, Charlie. I'm interviewing a girl today who's the daughter of one of my friends. I interviewed her sister last month, but she had been alienated from her mother for, I think, 8 years, and her mother had been alienated from her parents for 12 years. All of them reconciled in the past year. And my friend is
Wow.
in her 40s. Yeah. And this daughter's in her 20s. So
Yeah.
we're going to talk about that. But yeah, I mean, it is so important for your own relationship, but
Mm,
also your legal outcome. And there's an attorney that we love. He's a domestic violence attorney who specializes in alienation cases, and his name is Ashish Joshi. And he's written an excellent book called Litigating Parental Alienation that is fascinating and is going to be a big part of our book that's coming out on this topic, as
yeah.
well as our course. But he really gets into this one section in terms of how important it is for alienated parents to have professionals that can really help them manage their emotions and deal with all that stuff besides their attorney, because they are not going to do well in a legal
So true.
situation. One of the
Yeah.
worst, one of the ways they will blow up their case is to just go into an evaluation and be themselves.
Mm,
Because again, you are full of um, what's the word I'm thinking of? Like you're entitled to have this rage,
mm,
like this, to feel like this sense of injustice because it's true. Like this is so unfair. You're so emotional. Like you can't not have those feelings, but you
yeah.
cannot present to evaluators like that. You
Mm,
can't present to judges like that. So we have to train you how to present properly where it makes sense. And our clients feel like a lot of calm often after a session because they're like, oh, I've totally turned around how I do it and it's working. Like this is amazing. I
yeah.
just didn't know what I was doing wrong. And so they actually, the rage starts to lessen. The feeling of injustice lessens because they realize like this is what I actually can do. I was doing it wrong and that was making it worse for me. So
I,
now that I understand, it makes things better. And oh, I dropped my little button, but I have this button
so,
because I used to teach high school English, and it says, if you think education is expensive, try ignorance. Because
that,
ignorance is what's going to destroy you.
yeah. I mean, and that again comes back to the coaching because the coaching gives you all these skills, that gives you the knowledge. It helps you emotionally. I mean, it's just like a mental reset. It's a
It'll
reprogram.
change your life.
Yeah.
Like we have clients, they're in new relationships and their relationships are they're new ones with their wonderful new partners are being
Hmm, hmm.
damaged because of the
Yep.
grief and the
Yeah.
issues that they haven't dealt with. And their partners are saying, I don't know how to help you. So often we'll get clients because their partners will find us and be like, you need to talk to them.
Yeah.
And then the relationship improves and then their partners that can also come to the support group to understand how to
Yeah.
help in these situations. But
That's
everybody benefits.
they do. I do more and more couples coaching
Right?
because the partners who come into this, they are deep. In many instances, they find themselves, in the cases of alienation, they find themselves also being vilified, being
Absolutely.
having very challenging relationships with these kids. These partners, they're not the biological parents of the children, so they've got a lot less patience.
And a
But
lot less power.
yeah, and they're
They're
deeply
stuck.
upset
Yeah.
by how the targeted parent has been treated.
Yeah.
And I find taking both people together through kind of a process where they can get onto the same page and understand where each of them are coming from
Mhm.
and start thinking about their own relationship as well as what's going on with the kids. It's just so powerful.
Yep, same.
But
We actually, I'm thinking one of our clients recently, her, and had some great victories, but so her new partner hired us for more sessions because he's like, I want to deal with my anxiety. I said, great. And like we're laughing through the sessions because he's just really scared because he loves her and he's so worried about how this case is affecting her.
yeah, yeah. And I mean, one of the things it's great that people get into a new relationship because so many people that their experience, especially if they've been through domestic violence, and alienation, especially even worse, the combination of those two things together, that they're terrified that the same thing's going to happen to them again. And but it's so nice to see an empath getting into a relationship with somebody else, ideally another empath, who
Right.
who kind of they bond together, they can kind of talk through everything, they can support each other. It's the opposite relationship to the one that they had with, a narcissist or somebody who's got some other, mental disorder. But again, it's nice to be able to give people hope that, this is just something you're grinding your way through now, but it will get better. But
Yeah, and
go on.
oh, I was going to say, so yeah, and my partner Chris, the male half of Been There Got Out, we're a couple in real life and we've been together for
Mm,
10 years and his ex has been really trying hard, to ruin the relationship with the kids and there
yeah,
was a period where he was separated from his son for a little while and everything has worked out beautifully and we also see that in our own client base too, where people feel hopeless and things really do turn around.
yeah, they do. It is amazing. Emma and myself, we have kind of been together for 13 years. She's also an alienated mum. So we've done a bit like you guys. You kind of covered the whole gambit. You've been alienated, step alienated. Um, and I will never
Hmm.
forget one of the first times that I took Emma to meet my kids, and my ex came storming out, leant into, well, she was shouting down the street, and was kind of trying to lean into the car and was saying to Emma, I hope you don't have young children. He's not safe around young children. I mean, exactly to say, they tried to destroy our relationships, our new relationships from the get-go. And that caused a lot of issues for Emma and me in the first instance, because I had to say, look, this is not true. And she did. She had a 7-year-old kid. And I just had to say, look, this is not
Yep.
true. And if you believe it, the risk for her, of course, is if you believe me and I'm genuinely not a paedophile, then that's all fine. We preserve our relationship. But if you believe her, we're going to just split apart. And
Right.
we're never going to have the opportunity of you discovering that I'm not a paedophile.
Hmm.
I'm a good, honest to God guy who loves his children madly.
Right.
But
Right.
I mean, it's just the things they're prepared to do are just
Oh,
unbelievable.
I know. I know. We could have a whole long conversation
But
about
but
about that.
I'd like to segue that with another thing that I know we were keen to cover, which is false accusations
Oh, false accusations of parental alienation or false accusations in general.
in general, and then we'll go on to the false accusations of parental alienation.
Oh, all the time. I mean,
Yeah.
that's what they do I mean, think about while you were in the relationship, how you got blamed for everything.
Hmm.
All the gaslighting, all the times you question yourself, like, am I the one? My ex used to, at the end of our relationship, we were together for 20 years. He would say, hold my hands and say it with me, Lisa. Say, I'm an abuser. Because you know you're an abuser. I was like, I don't think I am though. But I was
Yeah,
like,
yeah,
am I?
yeah. Yeah,
Like,
no,
but
because
what I don't
and
know
we're
what I
empaths.
did. Like, what did I
We're
do?
self-reflective. We
Yeah,
self-doubt.
yeah. I just was like, I don't, and there's like this only started like right as we were on the precipice of divorcing, and
Yeah,
it was like I
yeah.
don't know where this is coming from, but it was really, really weird.
Hmm.
So that happens while you're still in the relationship. You're being accused of things
Yep.
that you did
Constantly.
wrong.
Yep.
So why is it any different that once you split, suddenly they're filing motions full of lies, full
Yep.
of lies.
Yep.
So now restraining
How
order.
how should parents handle all this
Oh
stuff?
my God. Okay. So first of all, you need to get support because again, just being a human being, when someone makes false allegations against you, and
Hmm.
accuse you of terrible things, because that's what your exes like ours do.
Yeah.
Not just like little lies, but like awful, awful kinds of
Yeah.
abuse.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, I have to defend myself.
Hmm.
I go, to go into defense mode, and they start throwing more at you. And so our people will get in this vicious cycle of like defense, like a boxer in the corner like this, it's being hit with all these
Hmm.
blows. Um, People don't realize that a lot of those accusations don't matter. Now, I'm not talking
Hmm.
about restraining order stuff. And I'll get into that in a second. But
Yeah.
a lot of the stuff that you want to defend against, like, it doesn't matter. People aren't paying attention. And I think that that's very common for people to understand, like, what are the factors that the court actually cares about? And the
Hmm.
other thing I want to remind people of is verifiable proof. Does your ex have verifiable proof of what they're
Hmm.
saying?
Hmm.
Or are they just writing down all kinds of what's called hearsay? It's what they think is
Yeah.
true. In court, it's going to come down to verifiable proof.
Hmm.
So now there's always also accusations of sexual abuse or physical abuse or other things where, like, if somebody makes a claim like that to court, a lot of times a judge will just issue a temporary restraining order because they have to. And that's another like, oh, how could the court do this? Like, I didn't even have an opportunity to say anything or defend myself. And now I have to wait 2 weeks to 6 months before I can even say anything. And I can't see my kids, or I'm on supervised visitation. Like, how could this be happening? People are just blown away that
Yeah.
this is the reality of their lives when they've lived an honorable life, that people have believed them. And now they're splitting up and this is happening. The reason that judges do this is because they want to err on the side of safety. And
Hmm.
now I know in the UK you have coercive control laws.
Yeah.
Our states, we're up to 7 out of 50 so far, including mine. But they have to be careful. And so, but if someone is found to have done repeated false allegations in certain states, they can be punished and custody can be affected. So, for example, false
Good, good, because that's
accusations
one of the
of
big problems with the false allegations in so many instances.
like
n- uh,
nothing
n-
happens to them.
Nothing happens, and then they
Yeah.
just pop the next one out, and it's like
Yeah.
I think I've heard of some instances where people have done it like up to 10 times, and then the judge has done something. But
So
in
that's what
far
it
too
is.
many cases, yeah, they
I know.
just get away with it. Not
I
even
know.
without even really a slap on the wrist.
Right. So again, that's part of understanding how to present it in court properly,
Mm.
to ask for what's called relief, like what's appropriate relief to ask for when someone keeps doing this. And I'm thinking from especially talking to Ashish Joshi and reading his book, like you want to ask for sanctions, you want to ask for legal fees, some people even jail time. I know I've interviewed an attorney from New Jersey after New Jersey just got coercive control laws. And she was, as we were on the interview, she was looking up stuff on her computer. She goes, oh, here's something about like false accusations of sexual abuse, how they can really get in trouble and there can be sanctions, because when you make an allegation about that, it's not just a matter of how it affects the other parent, it's how it affects the child, because these
Mm.
things have to be investigated, and it's very intrusive and terrifying
Mm.
for a
Mm.
child to be subjected to things like this, especially when they're false.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
it really is harmful when people lie about things like that. And often people think like, how come people believe liars? It's because the justice system is full of liars. The
yeah,
police here lie all the time. The liars have ruined it for the
yeah,
rest of us,
yeah, yeah,
you
yeah.
know?
I mean, I think that again, that's something that a lot of I associate a lot of the lying with alienation because the people who are prone to alienate tend to be liars.
Yeah.
They make our children into liars,
Mm,
and the systems that are designed to protect our children and us are not designed to look through all the lying. So the
right,
psychologists take everything at face value. The courts have got to take everything at face value. The lawyers take everything at face value, and you just think, oh my God, you're just being fed all these lies by everybody, and you
right,
believe it. And then you're going to rule against me because I'm not prepared to lie. I'm not prepared to be, that person that is over there just slinging mud
right.
and see how
So
much it will stick.
that's why it's so important to do what we call taking strategic oversight of your case and realizing how to
Mm.
prepare proper documentation yourself to give to a lawyer, to know
Yeah.
what to ask for immediately, to jump on a violation of a parenting plan immediately, and to go after very aggressively when your
Hmm.
ex starts violating a parenting plan and making excuses. The kids have certain activities and they can't see you. They don't want to see you, not this weekend. Like, you have to stay on top of that. And a lot of times, judges get upset because people wait too long before
Yeah.
doing something. And they're like, it's been 9 months of this. Like, why is this just coming to me now? And
Mm.
that becomes the new normal or the status quo because it's like you accepted it. That makes you look bad. So understanding
Mm.
ahead of time, as early as possible, what to do to protect yourself from alienation. What are the red flags that a parent is doing it? What to look for in your child? To
Yeah.
be like, I need to pay attention to this. How to start strategically communicating, to document, you
Hmm.
know, last week, you kept the kids for 2 days of my parenting time. I asked you, like, and then to say, I'm sure we can both agree how important it is to follow our
I
agreement.
I think this is such an important area because that preventative side could have an enormous impact. And I'm guessing that the people who would come along to you on being there got out for advice about a high conflict divorce might not even really be that aware of some of the consequences. They
Right.
might be very focused on the domestic violence and less focused on what's happening with the alienation. And again, unaware of the subtleties of all that grooming, the pre-alienation going on in beforehand, and then suddenly it hits them. And
Mm-hmm.
and most people go into like shock and denial when they hit alienation. But exactly as you're saying, getting ahead of the curve, starting to think, oh, is that happening to me? Could that happen to me? You know, that can make an enormous difference.
It's interesting you say that because people do find us because of the legal abuse stuff, because we don't
Yeah.
have anything about alienation on our little, tagline. But as we introduce ourselves to new people during like a discovery Zoom meeting or something,
Hmm.
I'll give a little bit about each of our backgrounds, and I'll say we're working on our latest book right now, as well as a course on what to do when your ex is turning the kids against you, and you see in their faces like, oh, that's me, that's my problem, like
Mm.
all the time. I feel like it's every other call, at least, where
Wow.
someone's like, that's
And
already happening. I see it, and we're like, we're going to jump on that.
yeah, and again, the big problem is that this is something that none of us are aware of typically because
Mhm.
we know that we're taught at school and there are movies and there's stuff about murder and theft and psychological abuse, that sort of stuff. We see that quite frequently. We don't see anything about parental alienation.
No,
Yeah, I think in the
no.
States alone, it's something like 22 million people
Yeah.
that are affected. And it's a gargantuan number. I'm not quite sure the global number, but it's like 6 to 8% of the whole population
Yep.
in most of the countries in the Western world. And I'm sure
Everyone I
it's
talk to,
elsewhere as well.
every party I talk to, every time I'm at a party, and someone's talking to me and I mention what I do, they're like, oh my gosh, yes. Like, it's either
Yeah.
me or someone I know, someone I love, like, constantly.
Yeah. And that also makes, because the other thing that I wanted to touch upon was there are some groups of people who are denying alienation.
Hmm.
And it fits in with this whole story of the domestic violence. And maybe if you can share your views on that, because again, you must be coming across this. We come across these groups really
Okay.
regularly, and it's terrifying that they're denying parental alienation exists as a thing.
Okay, so when we were first starting out, and Chris was getting his certification as a high conflict divorce coach,
Hmm.
uh, we were told that that was a very bad word, and why, and Richard Gardner and pedophile and suicide and blah blah blah. This is something
Yeah.
abusers use to distract from actual domestic violence. As a domestic violence advocate, I'm like, okay. And I saw the movie Allen versus Farrow. I don't know if you've heard of that, the documentary
No.
about Woody Allen versus me. And I'm like convinced, yes, like he did these terrible things. But it is like, to turn a child against another parent as punishment for a relationship is just another form of domestic violence.
Yep.
So if your ex was already treating you this badly, treating your kids this badly in the relationship,
Mhm.
why would you think that just because you separate, they're not going to try to weaponize your kids? So, okay, let's say parental alienation is a bad word. Okay, let's call it abuse by proxy. Let's call it coercive control, which is what we try to do because I'm like, I want to try to balance it because I want people to not hear the term and say, I'm not paying attention, because it doesn't exist.
Yeah.
Let's not call it that. Let's talk about, is your ex doing these behaviors? Do you notice that your kids coming back to you and saying these things about you that are lies that sound just like things that your ex says? Do you
Mm.
notice your kids are using what's called borrowed scenarios, using, again, language that your ex uses that doesn't fit
Parroting.
their age? Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. Or
parroting.
parroting in adult language. Yeah.
Right, right. Like, are you going to deny that
Mm.
happens? Are you going
Mm.
to deny that people who are coming to you saying my kid doesn't want to talk to me anymore, that's not true because you don't
Mm.
agree with the label? Like, I think I told you, Charlie, like we've met so many people who have said the word parental alienation at a coercive control comp where they're asking for help. They're saying, this is happening to me. I'm terrified. Like, what do I do? And they're like, that doesn't exist.
Yeah.
You're denying 20 million plus people's experience. You're,
Hmm.
and the irony is these are the same people who are furious that no one is believing their stories about their own domestic abuse experiences.
Absolutely.
This is all part of domestic abuse. It's happening
Yeah.
to your children.
Yeah.
Your
Yeah.
children are victims. You can see it in your house. You see your kids
Mm. Mm.
being brainwashed just like you were. Like,
Yeah.
how could you say that that's not happening? Like everybody knows it. So don't use the word if you don't like it, but don't deny the experience. That's basically what an abuser does. An abuser denies your feelings. They deny your
Absolutely.
reality. People who do that are doing the same thing. They're denying other people's reality. They're basically making a victim feel worse.
Mm.
It's the same power dynamic. It is so abusive to say your experience isn't real because I don't like the label.
I mean,
Wow.
it actually gets worse than that because there's a witch hunt on
Oh,
by journalists. I mean, they're some of the worst people to do it. And there are some well-known characters. We won't mention any names. But there are journalists who do this. There are psychologists, professionals who do this. And they're basically going out and trying to destroy the reputations of some very expert and qualified people in the field of parental alienation
hmm.
and trying to undermine them, trying to take them to court. Uh, I was doing a podcast with somebody only a couple of weeks ago. The day that we were doing the podcast, two journalists in the UK in one of the big major newspapers came out with this massive piece, and they were just trying to attack her on every possible aspect of her life, and it was just a pure exercise in mudslinging. But they were teamed up with some of these advocacy groups. And, I can understand they actually believe their own rhetoric, but they're so closed-minded as to the potential of maybe this thing does exist. Maybe, instead of us trying to deny that parental alienation exists, maybe group together on the common ground,
It's
about the
domestic
domestic
violence.
violence.
It's
Yeah,
domestic violence. That's the thing. And again, like trained as an advocate, I am conscious that that's why I'm like trying to balance it by saying like alienation, abuse by proxy, because I
hmm,
don't want to like use the wrong word, but the behaviors exist. That's the most
totally,
important.
totally.
We know the behaviors exist,
Yeah.
and that's something I know Ashish Joshi talked about in our interview, where he's
Hmm.
like, if you have a case and someone's saying, well, parental alienation doesn't exist. Okay, put the label aside. Do you believe that at the end of a relationship, a parent will badmouth another parent? Yes. Okay. Do you believe that sometimes they won't allow the child to see? Okay, that's what it is. I mean, there's several factors, but those are examples of alienating behaviors. And especially from in the last few years from being trained as an advocate, Chris going through his certification with one of these advocacy groups that I won't say, but we have completely separated with
Yeah.
because of those militant views that we don't agree
Mm.
with anymore. Um, I lost my train of thought, but we've really changed our perspective in terms of like the experience is real.
Mm.
It does exist, and we want to support all victims,
Yeah.
male, female, like anyone going through this, because this is one of the most heartbreaking things, and we see it every single day with our clients. It is the number one thing mixed into legal abuse
Mm.
is using the children to punish the other parent for the fact that the relationship is over.
And I think you've just hit another point there, this whole gender bias, because I see that all the time. And it's so unfortunate because that links in with the deniers of parental alienation are basically saying the only people that are domestic violence abusers are men. That is so untrue. There are so many women who do it as well. But basically with parental alienation as well, that the men, so many men have it in their heads that the only people who ever do this is women. And there are so many women who have it in their heads the only people who ever do this is men. And we see groups out there that are kind of so splintered and they're vehemently sort of so angry with the opposite sex. It's like, stop fighting each other, guys. We need to collaborate to show a groundswell of like, this is an experience we're all having. This is the stuff we need to share with the politicians, with the psychologists, with the legal profession. Not, at the moment we're being held to ransom by divide and conquer, and we're doing it to ourselves.
Yep, yep. I remembered the thing I was thinking about before.
Cool.
So in terms of the term parental alienation, whenever I'm interviewed, so I interview advocates, but for our podcast and our whole brand, we interview lots of lawyers and mental health professionals, but specifically lawyers. They're the ones in family court every single day. And when I bring up the behaviors, they go, "Oh yeah, alienation." That's the term they use. So to
Hmm.
not understand parental alienation and what that actually means is to your peril
Yeah.
because you will be falsely accused of it. And
Mhm.
you need to understand the behaviors to go after when your ex is doing it because it's going to happen. In these high conflict cases with kids, it almost always is going to happen. I actually can't think of a case we have where that
Mhm.
is not happening. Well, actually, maybe a couple, but most of them, that's just part of it. The other thing about gender. So I mentioned to you that Chris and I have male and female clients are all over the
Mhm.
world,
Mhm.
and what we do that is very unique is on Sundays we have our weekly legal abuse support group, and of course alienation is a huge issue in it. But
Yeah.
in the group, we blend our male and female clients. It's one of the perks, and one of the
Mm.
most beautiful things I've seen is people crossing gender lines to support each other,
Good.
to have
Good.
our men, first of all, feel like they have a place to talk and be understood because most of the time men don't talk. So men
Totally.
are in the group,
Yeah.
sometimes men with their new partners are in the group. We
Hmm.
also have a number of same-sex couples. So clear, women in particular.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
there's always a woman abuser there too. And I think one of the reasons we do the groups together are because our clients overall tend to be super kind and empathic, and we want
Mm.
to foster that empathy. But
Yeah.
they're also highly educated professionals, and so they do a lot of research and they bring like wonderful
Mhm.
resources to the group. So I love seeing them cross gender lines and to understand that everyone in the group is a protective parent if they have kids, because not all of our clients have kids.
Yeah.
But it's really amazing, I think, for women in particular to hear about the experience of men and what domestic violence looks like. It's amazing for women to hear like one of our male clients talking about his child clinging to him saying, "Daddy, I'm terrified. I don't want to go with mommy. Please don't make me go," which
Mm.
you never hear. You always hear a
Mm.
mother
Mm.
saying that. But to hear a father who our clients get to know each other, the ones that come to the group regularly, like
Yeah.
he's telling the truth and other men in the group explaining what's happening with them. It's really, really important. It's already accepted that women are victims, but it's
Yeah.
important for women to understand what it looks like for men. And using the kids is really how men are punished.
Yeah, and I think so many men are exactly as you say, they're afraid to speak out. You know, I took me a long time to realize myself that I hadn't gone through domestic violence, but I had gone through psychological abuse for
Mm.
years.
Which is domestic violence and is in a lot of ways it's worse than physical
Yeah,
abuse.
I mean it was terrible. Lisa, I'm just conscious of the time,
I
and
know.
this has just been amazing.
And we're
But what
not done. We have to
and
keep
and,
going.
and
Not
but but
today.
but yeah, I mean let's make this into like a little series. And we'll just call this part one. I'm going to put part one on the cover of the podcast when it goes out.
Okay.
But just before I let you go, so first of all, how can people join this weekly group? Where can
So
they go?
okay, so that's generally so we screen all of our clients because we
Hmm.
don't want the wrong kinds. And hopefully they don't get in too often. But so what we do is have like a discovery call or like a Zoom and find
Yeah.
out like how we might be able to help. And then we have like a membership program. Or if they're
Hmm.
our client, that's one of their perks. We are with our course, we are going to be doing something that's much bigger that is going to have a meeting, but I don't have the link for that yet. So that'll come out soon. Yeah. But yeah, so they should just set up for a discovery call and then
And then you'll
they
give them
can't just
access
like
to it.
show up because the privacy of our clients is really protected.
Yeah, yeah,
So we want
that's
to
really,
make
really
sure we
important.
know that they could feel safe in the group.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Because then people can speak with honesty. You don't want the infiltrators.
Yeah, yeah,
We
I
have to do that
definitely
with
don't.
live Q&A sessions as well. Is kind of go
Yeah,
through the list of people and say, okay, do any
right.
of these look like a dodgy thing? And I do say at the beginning of sessions, if anybody is here with the wrong intentions, I'm just going to kick you out.
Yeah.
It's going to be goodbye and be goodbye forever.
Yeah.
How how else can people get access to all these amazing resources that you've got available for them?
Oh, just go to our site, beentheregotout.com, but especially Instagram is my home base. So if you
Mhm.
just search been there, got out, not two, that's Chris,
Yeah,
but been
yeah.
that's our backup, but just been there, got out. And then we also have like a monthly newsletter. We do interviews all the time with people like you, Charlie,
Fantastic.
usually like 2 to 3 times a week.
Hmm.
We have this big course coming out, how to communicate with your ex without destroying your case or losing your mind. Our
Hmm.
first book came out in 2023. It's
Wonderful.
called Been There, Got Out, Toxic
Where
Relationships,
can
High
people get
Conflict,
that? Is that
Amazon.
available on Amazon?
Yeah,
Cool.
and the next
Cool.
book is going to be on Amazon too, and that's going to be Been There, Got Out, What to Do When Your Ex is Turning the Kids Against You. And that course should be out this year, 2025.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so we got a
Amazing.
lot going on.
Amazing. Lisa, thank you so much for coming along today. I'm definitely going to get you back so that
Same.
we can carry on having this conversation because I think it's so important.
Yeah, definitely.
And
Thank you so
thank
much.
everybody who's watching this on YouTube. And also, if I'll put up something at the end just so they've got all the details of how to get a hold of you.